Hi, and welcome to the Deer IQ podcast, where smart hunting begins. I'm Adam Lewis, and we're in a new series talking about the nuances of deer science. In this episode, we're looking at specific applications of deer hearing and just how to beat it. How you may want to start hunting differently because of what the science really means and tells us about their hearing. I'm joined again by my friend Mark for this discussion, and here are the top things to look for during this high IQ episode about beating the hearing of a whitetail deer. What are the ways a whitetail hears very differently than a human, and why is this so important to fully understand? How can you figure out how far typical noises you make while hunting really travel? What does this mean about our critical hunting choices regarding our gear? And what is the rule I suggest you always follow? How should you think differently about how you approach your stand or blind? And why do I suggest this? And there's a ton more in there as usual. So let's get to the podcast and up your deer IQ. All right, I'm back here with Mark. Mark, welcome back once again to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Good having you. We've been in this series talking about deer science, digging deeper into that. We had this, series last year that people found really interesting, where I talked to several people, Dr. Carl Miller, Bronson Strickland, and I have, a decent science background. I'm a science teacher, and I've really delved into stuff quite a bit through that, but through my, just side stuff in the hunting industry. And so this week we're going to talk about deer hearing and just implications. So we'll refresh on the science, but really, what does that mean? How can I use that type thing? So welcome back, Mark. I'm going to turn it over to you as we kind of just chat through this and really what this means for hunters.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. And don't pause it, but definitely go back and listen to those if you haven't, because they're, you had some heavy hitters that have done some incredible work, research, and just have a lot of hands-on, time in stand, time in the field. And so those were all great conversations. But, my natural tendency after I listen to that sort of thing is like, what does that mean for me? Like, I think the science is fascinating, but then it's like, how can we use that to our advantage?
Right.
Right. So, what do we know? I guess, recap. What do we know about deer hearing? Like, how does it work? How do they use it?
Yeah. So there's some things that people think that are untrue and some things that are true about it. There's always perceptions about things. So people think deer can hear way better than we can. Yes and no. Right. So the first thing is, they do hear better in three ways. And real quickly, their pinnae, with their outer ear, they obviously have this huge radar dish that can funnel sounds into their eardrum. And that's a huge advantage to our little teeny ears, and we can't move them, right? So they can really hone in on a sound. And they also, the distance between their ears is such that they can triangulate much better than we can. Like, sometimes we have a hard time, like, where'd that come from? They know exactly where stuff came from, right? Where they don't hear better than us is the loudness. Like, they don't hear much really any better than we do as far as the loudness of something, perception-wise. But of the three ways, that's one. They have the pinnae, the outer ears, they can move. Huge advantage. And I know for sure, and we've all probably experienced this, where we're out in the woods and we're watching some deer close by, and they all snap their head somewhere, and then it takes a while before we hear whatever it is coming, another deer or something. So they obviously can hear a little better than us, or at least pinpoint that sound, pick it up a little better. But their outer ear is definitely one of those. Another one is, if you look at the audiogram, it's called, is the sweet spot of the frequency. Like, they hear best between 4 and 8,000 hertz. We hear best between 2 and 4,000 hertz. And it doesn't sound like a big difference, but that's where they hear best. And I did a bunch of testing. So this is one thing that I do have that I don't think anybody else has really done. Years ago, I went to the University of Toledo and tested a bunch of hunter noises on some really highly specific microphones. Like, went in this soundproof booth, tested about 30 sounds from crunching leaves to breaking branches to clanging stands and sticks and metal and all this stuff. How loud is that? What's the frequency range of that? And the thing is, and it makes sense, that a lot of these sounds peaked in frequency ranges that deer hear best in. And so that is, well, the deer want to stay alive, right? So they want to hear something coming, and it kind of makes sense. But that's another area that they are just really attuned to predators, and us being one of them, right? And then the third way is ultrasonic hearing. So we hear up like in our best, and Mark, you and I are not at our best anymore as far as our hearing.
May have missed the couple gunshots without hearing pro and that sort of thing, yeah.
But as we age, the bones in our ear wear out. Mm-hmm. And so our range of frequency we can hear in just starts creeping in on the ends. And it starts at about 20 to 20,000 hertz. That's the best, probably when we're young, teenagers, and then we start losing it. We can't get it back. A deer's is about 200, so not quite as low, but almost as low, to about 60,000 hertz. That's 40,000 hertz higher than we can hear, they can detect. And so they have this whole range of sounds they're hearing that we have no clue that they're there. And it's not like they're hearing extra sounds, but they're just hearing more of it, more frequencies of it. And these higher sounds actually help them tune in better on where stuff is, those high frequencies. So they have a big advantage in the hearing department. A lot of people might not realize that. So that's why it's so important. Okay, we understand this, but again, what do we do with that? So that's just the background of it. But okay, what does that mean for me as a hunter?
Right, because and high frequency doesn't carry as far,
Correct.
But it's more specific. It has more energy, I think, in that frequency wave. So you think about I think whales and elephants, if I'm not mistaken, can hear subsonic because they have to communicate over these huge long distances that tend to be more open. Whereas bats or something like that, they're honing in on tiny little micro insects, but at close ranges. But it's incredibly detailed and focused. Yeah,
that's a great example. The low frequencies carry further, right? That's why we can hear thunder a long ways. Those low frequencies just keep going. So, but they can hear better in those ways. So what does that mean for us as hunters? So let's dive into some of these things.
So talking about the research, the leaves and metal clanking and stuff like that, because you've mentioned that before and you've got some numbers, but explain to me something in terms of what does that mean? Because obviously you whack your backpack buckle on your tree stand. We know that that's not good, but how bad is that? How much of an impact does that sound actually make?
Yeah, and I would suggest this. This is something that anybody can do. Go online, find a decibel meter for $30 or whatever, buy it, and start clanging some of your gear around and see how loud that is. Okay, when you start doing that, and this gets back to my testing at the University of Toledo, you can find easily just the general sound pressure level. That's called. How many decibels is it, right? So let's just look at some examples in the physics of just how far will this travel, right? So let's say a really calm day, the ambient sound, the surrounding background noise is 20 decibels. That'd be pretty calm, quiet. Let's say it's a crisp morning or evening, it gets really quiet.
So that's birds singing, leaves rustling,
That's just, picture a super quiet morning in the woods, really calm, quiet, frosty morning, let's say. Let's say the ambient sound is around 20 decibels. That is where sounds are going to bleed together, and it's going to be hard to determine one from the other, and they'll kind of just like white noise. It'll kind of you won't be able to detect it, right? So if a noise gets down in that range, you aren't going to be able to hear it anymore, and we'd assume that a deer wouldn't hear it either, right? So let's say you crunch through leaves, and here's some examples here. So at 20 decibels ambient noise and surroundings, let's say you're crunching leaves, and this is from what I recorded. It can be around 75 decibels. That's a loud, crunchy leaves. It's like walking on, nacho chips, right, in the woods. At 75 decibels, what happens is, because of the science, not to get too geeky, Mark, because you say you didn't like the science of it, but
invert math, just Boil it down.
Every time you double the distance, you drop 6 decibels. Right. So if this is 1 meter, it's 75. At 2 meters, it's going to be 69 decibels. And you just keep carrying that out.
Gotcha.
For us to get to down around 21 or so decibels, that will have traveled 500 yards, crunching in leaves on those super calm days. And deer are going to hear that. They're going to know something, to at least look for something, right? Something is here that they know is in their environment that shouldn't be there, right? That's a long ways, 500 yards. Metal. So if you clang your stand pretty loud, let's say it's 85 decibels, that clanging with that same law could travel 1,600 yards.
Dang.
And it makes sense, though, because we've all been out hunting, right? In maybe a neighborhood-ish type setting, 40 acres here, but there's neighbors over there half a mile mowing their lawn or out in the yard, kids playing around. You can hear them. Right?
Right. Dude fires up a chainsaw like a mile away. And
yeah.
You're like, oh, yeah.
So it's kind of silly to think that the noise we make is not carrying that far either, right? And so, again, that's why this is super important. How can I diminish this or eliminate it or blend this in so deer do not recognize it? Because as we look at deer senses, we talk about this. They have the 3 main senses, right? Smell is kind of on its own. If they smell you, you're done. If they don't, you should be okay, right? But the other 2, sight and hearing, are linked really strongly together. They like to use them in tandem to figure something out. So I've got to get past their sight, but more importantly, I think you got to get past their hearing, which kind of can trigger their vision, right? I hear something, I'm going to look at it. If I don't hear it, I don't know where to look, right? So that's why this is so important. So what can I do? Like, what are some applications of this? I think the first one, we've mentioned it before, and a lot of people do this, is soundproofing your gear. Okay, so you buy the fuzzy stuff. You buy whatever to soundproof it. It's hard to soundproof it all, though. You talked about the clips and just get rid of them. We've said this before, but get rid of the stuff that you don't need that could make noise. Because, and I've even noticed this year, like I'm always trying to go through my stuff and say, what can I get rid of? Because it made a noise and I didn't like that, right? Unless the deer are hundreds of yards away when I get set up and there's a huge barrier or something between me and them, they have a chance of hearing that. And maybe some of the young dumb deer might not care, but if you want to shoot a decent buck, like, they care. That's how they got old. And so you can't be making those little noises. So these little clips and things, oops, it clanged that on my stick or my whatever, my platform. Oops, well, that could have cost you the whole night. You sit there, you see nothing.
When I was taping all my buckles, Adam was literally just cutting them off.
Yep, cut them all off.
But until it, like I said, bangs on your tree stand, your climbing sticks, then you're like, oh, especially when you take a lot of effort to get in silently and, creep in. Like, the worst thing is, like, it feels like you just blew the hunt because, you just got, or like you're pulling your bow up or something, and it's like, man, I've done so good. And then all of a sudden it's like twang. Yeah, that's a gut-wrenching feeling. So
we talk about 100 different things.
Being realistic about what makes noise.
Yeah.
And pretty aggressively, like, the more you slash, I mean, do you really need that buckle? If
it's not there, you can't make noise with it, right? So The idea is silence over convenience. Silence over convenience. Like, that's the rule that you should follow. And so you got to go through all your gear and figure that out. And that's just a yearly thing. What can I really pair it back to? Another thing is, you talk about okay, so here is your high IQ moment. Have you ever grunted in a buck? I've done this many times and noticed that whitetail have an incredible ability to pinpoint exactly where that noise came from, right down to the exact tree. Deer hearing is often overshadowed by a whitetail's other senses when it comes to our focus as hunters. But this should not be the case. Little noises many times are the reason we get picked off or a stand goes cold because deer have begun associating it with danger. Collared buck studies done at Auburn University show that just one hunt at a stand causes bucks to avoid that location. And that avoidance could be caused by a scent, sight, or sound. So paying extreme attention to noises we make is an area to focus on to be a better hunter and more consistent. The devil really is in the little details when it comes to hunting whitetail deer. And do you know your deer IQ? Do you think you're deer smart? Why don't you take our new and enhanced Deer IQ test and find out? Different than our fun test last year, this is an in-depth, comprehensive assessment that reveals your strengths, weaknesses, and exactly where to focus to see the biggest results in the woods. Maybe it's an extreme sound control regimen. The test will tell you exactly that. It's the only tool out there designed by an educator that can tell you this vital information, and is specifically made for those serious about improving as a deer hunter. Check that out link below and join the growing group of hunters who have already seen the big benefit of taking it and finding out their true deer IQ. All right, and now let's get back to the podcast. Another thing is, you talk about your clothes, right? We just talked about, we had an episode about vision. We got into camouflage a little bit. But then there's the whole noise factor of your clothes. And the thing you need to know as season goes on, at first you got a lot of foliage up, early fall. You got a lot of this buffer that will stop sound from carrying as far. But as the leaves start falling, as all this cover goes away, sound is cutting through much easier through wherever you're hunting, right? So these carry distances are increasing, and at the same time, the deer are getting smarter and smarter because the season's going by. They've been hunted for weeks and weeks. They're more on edge, right? They're really attuned now, and plus, sounds are carrying further.
Yeah, that's a good point that it changes over the course of the season even.
Yeah, and so what you're wearing is super important. You get these deer in close to you for a shot, 20, 15 yards, all your gear has to be so quiet that, again, that could. So I'm talking about clothing now. So does your clothing make noise when you draw? And I've returned equipment the last few years, clothing equipment that I really liked, that I wanted to use, and I returned it because a lot of what you have to look at is like these windproof layers, right? They say it's windproof. There's something crinkly, plastic inside of it that blocks the wind layer. Well, guess what? When it's super cold and you're drawing at a buck at 15 yards and that crinkles, that can be heard. And so you really have to look at really nuanced stuff like that when you're deciding on clothing. And hopefully that company, I'm not going to mention them, but hopefully they've kind of fixed that problem. But it's there with a lot of them. If it is like windproof, it probably has a crinkle layer underneath that is blocking that wind. So I went with some clothes that was really warm. It was like pretty good on wind, but not windproof. But it didn't have that layer. And I'd rather have that than, I'm probably not going to freeze to death. So, and then, just the surface. There's stuff that just is noisier than other stuff. If you think about like back in the day, and some people probably still do this, they wear I'm wearing my Carhartt coat, right? It's that really rough
the texture
jean,
of it can create noise.
Just making noise, rubbing, versus like a really soft like wool that's like Berber wool or Berber fleece that just is not going to make noise. All those things are really important, and they get more important as season goes by and as you lose those leaves and that cover, and also as it gets colder. Because, again, colder, more dense air is going to allow for sound to travel through it much better. The more dense something is, the easier sound travels, and that's air too. And so those are just nuancey things to think about as you start looking at gear, looking at your clothes, all those things.
Yeah, so, to your point, like even, some of these numbers are based probably more off like open distances, which in a lot of situations isn't necessarily applicable, right? You get into dense cover, sound's not going to travel the same. But using the terrain to your advantage as far as, entry and exit. And a big thing for me this past year was just slowing down. I'm terrible at rushing. If I get out of my truck, like I want to be in my stand. And a lot of stupid mistakes honestly happened just because I was anxious. I wanted to get back. I'm moving faster. I'm not paying as much attention, maybe even to where I step. And so I step on that super loud, dry stick that, snaps with a bunch of dry leaves around it. But even, if you're in hilly areas or, like I said, dense areas, like a wet river bottom is better than a high, dry, crunchy leaf scattered ridge if you have that option.
Yeah, so really thinking about your entry and exits are huge and what's going to block the sound you make. So people talk a lot about visual barriers, and it's a big thing with, land management. Oh, I got to have a visual barrier up and all that. Yeah, that's important. But what about the sound barrier for your entry and exit? Like deer can't hear you either. So can you use land features like ridges to block, use that between you and where the deer are? That's a huge one. If you got a ridge between you and deer on the other side of it, they probably will not hear you unless you're super loud. So utilizing that as you figure out how you're going to get in and out to a stand compared to where the deer will be at that time, right?
Yeah, you never want to bust through a horrible, deer-filled area just in the name of
using the terrain. Right, so using the terrain's super important, and just thinking that through about what's going to block your sound and what isn't. And being willing, and this is a big one, not just taking the shortest route. What is the least intrusive route, whether it be because of them being able to smell you, see you, and hear you? How can you get in there without any of those getting tripped, right? You really got to think that through ahead of time and be honest about it. Be honest about what you can actually get away with. And when I've made mistakes before, and I used to do this early on when I was just starting mobile hunting many years ago, I would overestimate my abilities to be quiet. And so I'd want to go back in these deep spots, these thick areas in the public land, and I had a climber on my back, and I just couldn't do it without making some noise. And those hunts were not good. They did not turn out well. So you got to be honest about that stuff and really thinking that through before you start doing that stuff. Slowing down is a huge one. That is going to eliminate so many mistakes. You just won't believe it because you're being thoughtful about every step. And I would encourage people to not look at it as you're getting to your stand, but you are hunting your stand. You're stalking your stand. Like that thing, you're trying to get to it without it knowing you're coming. Like it's a deer there at your stand. You're stalking your way in. So the rule, I call the rule of halves, would be, okay, if it normally, just a normal walk-in would be 15 minutes, cut that or double it basically, make it 30 minutes. You're going to half your speed and take twice as long. And that's just really going to help you out because each footstep, you're just less crunch, right? If you slow that out over time, so if you're, let's say, walking through crunchy leaves, if you really increase the impact time of crunching these leaves, it's not just one big noise. It is a series of small noises with each step. So you're decreasing noise that way. You're looking where you're stepping. You're not stepping on this stick and that stick. It might only take one, to let everything in the area know that you're trying to get your stand, right? And so that slowing down thing really does help out. And I know that you, if you want to kind of talk about this a little bit, but you kind of did that this year for yourself, right? And it kind of made a difference?
In so many ways, like that, out of probably all my goals, I'd say just slowing down was maybe the most impactful. Again, my tendency is just to rush. I step out of the house like I'm ready to go. I want to be in the stand. So one is giving myself more time was really the first thing. Don't push the time. If I want to be set up at 5:30, I'm going to be at the stand at 5, kind of a thing. And so right from the get-go, but yeah, just like you said, slowing down to where one, I could, it was actually more enjoyable. Like I found myself picking out a lot of little things of just enjoying nature. I remember when I walked in to kill that buck, stopping I'd probably I forget what it is, like a third of a mile walk in. And it's quite open, but I beeline it. And so like the last third is where I get sweaty, because I'm fine. So it's like I get sweaty. I'm getting close to the woodlot. So, leaves crunch, more movement, stuff can see me. And I stopped probably about halfway, and I just remember looking up at the stars and just thinking like, man, I don't really appreciate this a lot when I'm walking in because I'm so focused on just, the hunt or whatever. And it's like, it was just nice to just stop and take a breath and then kind of reset where it's like, okay, I'm getting close. Now I got to be really careful. I don't even have to worry about time because I'm way ahead of schedule. Right. So I'm going to scan the horizon. I'm going to listen. A lot of times going in, I'm used to kind of glassing, especially if I'm going in the afternoon or I can see down fields and stuff like that. And just like you said, basically stalked everywhere I went that day. And, I hunted the whole day in 2 different spots and ended up killing that buck probably, the last like 10 minutes of shooting light. So it was a long day. And even moving stands, midday, I was effectively stalking. But again, the same thing. I didn't set a time limit. It was like, I know I want to move. I know that's the best spot. I'm going to be really conscious of how much disturbance I'm making, creeping down. I started in a ladder stand and I actually hung my saddle in the second spot. And so just, like I said, forcing myself to go slow made a huge, huge difference. And I think that was a major influence in actually never bumping anything on my way in, which is pretty rare for that property. There's almost always deer in the fields. And just having an opportunity with a buck that was hanging out right in some cover and ended up walking where he
worked out.
Where I hoped he'd be.
Worked out. And so you're eliminating potential errors, right? And you call it, a clean hunt. There's so many things that can go wrong in a hunt. So you got to be as clean as possible.
Yeah, I didn't allow myself to make the mistakes, right? Like that's easy. That's within my control.
Right. Right. Well, good stuff. So I think the takeaway for today is to start thinking and seeing through the eyes, ears, nose, the senses of a deer. It's really easy for us to just think about us and how we're hunting, but, start looking at your hunts through these senses and things we talked about, the science of how deer actually see, hear, and smell. And I think that's the big takeaway. So we're giving away gifts of value last time. We'll do the same one here. It related to the senses is the scent control regimen. So if you haven't downloaded that, it's a free download. It's really meticulous. It goes through how to do it, what you need to do, and you'll see results with it if you do it and do it well. And that's a huge thing, huge hurdle to get over to help you become a better hunter, is that. Also, check out our workshop. We have a workshop this summer. It is going in detail for 2 days through stuff like this and even more application and that pyramid that we talked through a while back. What are the 6 things that you really have to get on target to have that surgical hunt like you had this past fall? And how do you get those in place? So more often than not, you can have that hunt and it works out for you. So that'd be a huge opportunity for guys. If you email me at adam@deeriq.com, I'll send you a link for $100 off that. It's for the first 12 people. So check out our Whitetail workshop this summer. It's going to be a great opportunity just to take it to the next level as a hunter in a short window of time. So those are a couple of things to check out. And
before then, we also had another one. We kind of deep dived into the deer science with vision, which was really interesting in terms of takeaways. That's all based off of kind of your original series, which was put out last year,
Yep.
like May, June, right around in that time frame, where you had a bunch of guests that kind of dove into different, deer science, biology. And so those are great listens. I actually just did that like last week, and still just as fascinating as the first listen. So really good stuff to go check out.
Yeah, we'll
in
link
these
those.
winter months when there's not as much to do, man.
Yeah, we'll link those in the notes. And Mark, again, thanks for joining.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, so here are your high IQ takeaways and challenges. Start approaching hunting by putting yourself in the place of a whitetail deer. What would you tolerate in your own bedroom or not? And how would this mentality change your approach to hunting? Next week, we continue with the science of whitetail and vital applications to our hunting. You won't want to miss any of those episodes, and I'll see you then.